Most people see player 001, Oh Il-nam, as just a frail old man trying to survive in Squid Game. He struggles through red light, green light, nearly gets killed in the night riot, and forms an emotional bond with Gi-hun. But what if I told you that he wasn't a victim at all, but the most guilty character in the entire show? Look closely, and you'll realize player 001 wasn't just a contestant. He was the mastermind. He designed the games, watched innocent people die for his amusement, and manipulated desperate players into competing for their lives. But here's the real question. If player 001 had been caught and put on trial, how long would he actually spend in prison? Could he be charged for mass murder, human trafficking, and conspiracy? Or would his old age and terminal illness protect him from justice? The truth is darker than you think. Let's break it down. At first, player 001 appears to be just another contestant, old, sick, and trying to survive. But as we later learn, he's not a victim. He's the mastermind behind the entire Squid Game. Think about it. Every challenge, every death, and every desperate decision made by the contestants was all part of his twisted experiment. He deliberately lured people into the games, manipulated their suffering for entertainment, and ultimately played along just to satisfy his own curiosity. But if Squid Game were exposed and the authorities got involved, could player 001 actually be prosecuted? Some might argue that he never physically killed anyone himself, but that doesn't mean he's innocent. In the real world, masterminds of deadly operations face harsher sentences than those who pull the trigger. Under South Korean law, his crimes would likely include mass murder, human trafficking, fraud, and conspiracy to commit violent crimes. International courts could even charge him with crimes against humanity. So, would his age and illness save him from punishment? Or would he spend the rest of his days behind bars? Let's break down his actual crimes and how much time he'd be facing in prison. Most people assume that since player 001 never physically killed anyone, he wouldn't face severe legal consequences. But in reality, masterminds behind deadly operations are often sentenced more harshly than their enforcers. Let's take a closer look at the specific crimes he committed and how much prison time each would add to his sentence. Did you notice that player 001 wasn't just a participant? He was the architect. He designed the games, set the rules, and ensured that every loss meant death. That means he wasn't just an observer. He was responsible for every single contestant who died. Under South Korean law, Article 250 of the Criminal Act, murder carries a minimum sentence of 10 years in prison, with life imprisonment or even the death penalty for premeditated mass murder. But here's the key detail. Each contestant's death could be counted as a separate murder charge. With hundreds of victims, his sentence would stack up to multiple life terms or execution. Even though he never personally pulled the trigger, South Korean courts would hold him accountable as the mastermind of a mass killing operation. Did you notice how player 001 deceived every contestant into believing the game was fair? In reality, he was lying the entire time. He knew the outcome, controlled the rules, and manipulated desperate people into competing without ever telling them the truth. Under South Korean law, Article 347, Criminal Act, large-scale fraud and deception carry sentences of up to 10 years in prison per charge. Since he misled hundreds of contestants, he would face decades behind bars just for this crime alone. Additionally, Article 114 of the Criminal Act states that anyone involved in an organized crime group can face an additional 10+ years in prison. Since Squid Game was a coordinated criminal enterprise, he would face conspiracy charges on top of everything else. Here's something most people don't think about. Player 001 treated contestants like lab rats in a deadly psychological experiment. He watched them kill each other, studied their reactions, and even tested their morals in situations like the marble game. In real life, human experimentation without consent is illegal under international law. South Korea is a signatory of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which prohibits cruel and degrading treatment. If caught, player 001 wouldn't just face South Korean law, he could be tried in an international court for crimes against humanity, which could result in life imprisonment or even a death sentence. At this point, it's clear. Player 001 was not just an old man playing a game. He was a criminal mastermind who would face one of the most severe sentences possible. But just how much time would he actually serve? Let's break it down. Now that we've uncovered Player 001's full list of crimes, the big question is, how much prison time would he actually face? Let's analyze his sentencing based on aggravating and mitigating factors, because while his crimes are extreme, there are always legal arguments that could slightly impact his punishment. Several factors would increase Player 001's prison sentence to the maximum possible punishment. Masterminding, mass murder. Courts always treat those who plan and finance violent crimes as just as guilty as the killers themselves. Since Player 001 created Squid Game, he is directly responsible for hundreds of deaths. Premeditation and psychological manipulation. Unlike impulsive killers, he carefully planned the games and even participated to observe human behavior. Courts increase sentences for planned crimes that involve deception, conspiracy, and organized crime. Squid Game wasn't just a few isolated killings, it was a structured criminal operation. As one of its leaders, Player 001 would face additional charges for running an illegal organization. Human rights violations, because the game involved kidnapping, forced participation, and psychological torture. He could face international prosecution for crimes against humanity. With these factors, Player 001 would likely receive multiple life sentences or even the death penalty. Could anything reduce Player 001's sentence? Here are a few legal loopholes he might try to use. His terminal illness. Courts sometimes show leniency toward criminals who are near death. If he could prove he only had a short time to live, he might avoid a full sentence. Lack of direct involvement in killings. Unlike the frontman, Player 001 never physically killed anyone. He might argue that he only created the game, but never participated in the executions. This could potentially lower his sentence, but wouldn't erase his guilt. Voluntary participation in the game. He might claim that contestants entered the game by choice, but this defense would likely fail, as the games involved coercion and deception. Even in the best-case scenario, Player 001 would still face decades in prison or a symbolic life sentence. After breaking down Player 001's crimes, it's clear he wasn't just another contestant trying to survive. He was the mastermind behind every death in Squid Game. With hundreds of murder charges, fraud, conspiracy, and human rights violations, South Korean courts wouldn't hold back. Given the aggravating factors, his role as the game's creator, his premeditated psychological manipulation, and his complete lack of remorse, he would likely receive multiple life sentences or even the death penalty. Even if he tried to use his illness or lack of direct involvement as a defense, those arguments wouldn't erase his responsibility. At best, he might receive a symbolic life sentence, but in reality, he would be remembered as one of the most dangerous criminals in history. So, what do you think? Was Player 001 the real villain of Squid Game? Should he have been punished, or was his reasoning justified? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, be sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden details of Squid Game. Thanks for watching. Until next time.